Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's talk about the plant-based con or the great plant-based con, according to author Jane Buxton. Now, she wrote a book titled The Great Plant-Based Con, and I stumbled across an interview where she was making the case for this book that she wrote, basically touching on the various different aspects of the book and what her message is. And she has a lot of different critiques and things like that about a plant-based diet or the plant-based agenda, right? And those who are pursuing and pushing this plant-based agenda, right? Primarily government entities and those who back these government entities pushing this plant-based con on us, right? And according to her, the environmental impacts of animal agriculture is largely overstated, to say the least, and there really isn't any benefit to human health to follow a plant-based diet. Not only is there no benefit to following a plant-based diet, it's actually detrimental to human health. It is species inappropriate with a variety of different major deficiencies that make it untenable long term. So let's dive a little bit into this review that we gave and explore some of the claims that she was making here.
Favorite books in recent years is called The Great Plant-Based Con by Jane Buxton. Why eating a plants-only diet won't improve your health or save the planet. Now, I really appreciate this book, and I've brought it up several times on Redacted, and we've invited the author, Jane Buxton, to come on, and she graciously accepted. This is her first time on Redacted, so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to talk to you.
You as well. Now, my own sort of, philosophy is that not eating animal-based foods makes me personally feel terrible, and eating more processed food exacerbates that. But you...
Interesting. All right. So it is her philosophy that not eating animal products makes her feel terrible, and eating processed foods exacerbates that issue. That's interesting. It's not that not eating animal products doesn't just make her feel terrible. It's her philosophy that it makes her feel terrible. It's not necessarily her experience. It's just her philosophy. It's a bit of an odd way to frame that issue, right? Because hey, either it does or it doesn't, right? But to say it's your philosophy that it does, it's a bit odd to me to frame it that way. But this statement does serve a purpose, right? And the purpose is priming your audience for a particular idea or belief, or being more susceptible to that idea, right? And also leading with an upfront disclosure of the bias or the leanings of this given conversation or platform, which is fine. We all have biases and things like that. Just as long as we're engaging in good faith discourse, right? We're being honest. So I just want to really point that out. I don't want to nitpick too much, but that is a bit of an odd way to frame that whole issue. But let's continue.
Lay out exactly all of the ways that we are sold meatless diets based on a bill of goods. And I wanted to ask you to go over it for our audience. First of all, the planet business, that eating meat is bad for the planet. You take that and poke a billion holes in that. And I think it's really, it reads almost like a fiction novel because you do such a great job. So can you address the climate-based lie that tells us not to eat meat?
Well, the main underlying premise of the lie, the big one that we hear about, is emissions most of the time. I mean, sometimes people talk about water use and sometimes they talk about land use, but it's mainly emissions right now because countries around the world are very, very focused on their net zero targets and getting those emissions down in every country and across every industry.
Interesting. All right. So far, what we're doing is we're glossing over, or she is glossing over water use and land use. Where, from everything that I've heard, when people talk about, what affects our climate, what's detrimental to our environment, water usage and land usage are actually big parts of that conversation, right? Because excessive water use can actually erode and completely destroy environments, right? And then land use can wipe out, whole, forests, right? Rainforests, things like this, wipe out whole biomes, right? Drive species extinction, this type of thing. So, the excess land usage, and I guess in this case, particularly for livestock and animal agriculture, is actually a big problem that very negatively affects the environment. So, if this whole thing that is just a plant-based con, well, you would have to address those two things. But I guess for whatever reason, at this point, she's choosing not to and just wants to focus on emissions. It's a bit of a missed opportunity, but okay, let's continue here. Just take note of that, right? Those out of those three things, emissions, land, and water usage, she's dismissing two of them. All right.
But what I say in the book, and in fact, even more evidence has come to light since I finished the book, is that the contribution of livestock to those emissions is just wildly exaggerated. I mean, wildly. The exaggeration that is put about, for instance, in mainstream documentaries like Cowspiracy and indeed in much of the press, is that livestock are responsible for about 50% of emissions, and that couldn't be further from the truth. That's an exaggeration of at least 3 times on the official number.
Okay, so we have an interesting claim here. According to Cowspiracy and our media at large, they are overestimating the contribution of emissions through animal agriculture by at least 3 times the amount. It's interesting. So I would love to hear how she came to that conclusion. What is she basing that conclusion on? What specific numbers, right? So I'm very interested in knowing specifically how she's coming to that number. Let's see if she actually makes the case for that here. Let's see how in depth she gets.
Then you get to the fact that the official number is also an exaggeration. And it's exaggerated because we use a metric, not to get too technical about this, but there's a metric that's being used to calculate it, which unfairly penalizes livestock and underplays the importance of, say, fossil fuel-based industries.
Okay, so not only is the contribution of animal agriculture exaggerated by at least 3 times the amount, but the official number of overall emissions is also largely overstated, according to her. And she says this because they use a metric. She doesn't want to say what that metric is, but they use a metric that she views as being unfair to animal agriculture and underplays the contribution of the fossil fuel industry. Well, what is that metric and why is it unfair? She doesn't say here, apparently. She doesn't want to get too technical. So for the sake of not getting too technical, she's not going to give any details at all to support this claim. Okay, all right.
So those things combined mean we're getting a skewed picture. Now, that doesn't mean that livestock farmers don't have things to do. Every industry has things to do to improve, to make sure that we're caring for the land, for biodiversity, for soil health levels, to improve methane emissions and reduce those. But it's nowhere near the sort of culprit that it's painted as being. This is the point I'm really making.
Right, but then you take a look at the planetary impact of monocrops, which are really the basis of plant-based diets. So for instance, seed oils or grains and things like that you have to bulk up on selling to the public if they are going to choose to not eat meat. And
It's interesting. Okay, so she didn't really, I guess she didn't feel the need to ask a follow-up question about why she has a problem with this particular or what this particular metric is. She already stated she doesn't like this particular metric. We don't know what that metric is that she's referring to, but she doesn't like that metric because it unfairly penalizes animal agriculture, where I guess she's a spokesperson for, unofficially, right? So it's just unfair, right? She doesn't really explain why it's unfair. She doesn't really explain what that metric is or anything like that. It's more of just a claim that she's making without any substance or evidence behind it. And so far, she's just disputing both numbers, the overall emissions and the contribution of animal agriculture. She's dismissing both those numbers and not really giving much substance as to why, right? She's just basically saying, oh, it's unfair. I view it as being unfair. So now she pivots to monocrops, right? So, oh, you know what's really harmful to the environment? Crops, plants, right? These monocrops. So that's interesting. Okay, so we're pivoting off of the emissions thing. We're going to focus more so on the negative effects of growing plants now, right? Let's not talk about the contribution that animals have to the environment. Let's focus on the harm of growing crops. Okay, interesting. All right, interesting pivot. Let's see what monocrops she's referring to here. Let's see what kind of argument we get here.
you do an excellent job talking about how that leads to soil degradation, and we pretend that that's not even a thing. I didn't write it down, but there's a TED Talk that you suggest that I went and looked up. The man, and now it's been
Might have
called
been Alan Savory. Was it Alan Savory?
about the man in Africa who uses livestock to regenerate.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to link to that in the show notes. So now we've sort of looked away from these types of solutions. Can you talk about soil degradation of monocrops by monocrops?
Yeah. So what we've done with industrial farming methods, monocrop farming, which we introduced around about the 1950s, depending on where you are in the world, is we got huge yields out of that. But in the process, we were slowly, gradually reducing the health of the soil every year because of the use of external inputs, nitrogen fixing inputs, fossil fuel based fertilizers and pesticides and all of those things. What they've created is a very weak, a very undernourished soil, which has resulted in undernourishment of the plants, which then gives us less nourishment. So it's a terribly vicious circle. And you're right that we don't hear about this, again, because as I said, net zero and carbon emissions has become the number one thing that people talk about. Is we've got.
Okay, so she hasn't named these monocrops, right? So let's say if I was a person and I wasn't educated on what these monocrops are or what they were referring to, I wouldn't really know what to look for, right? Now, for me, I know a little bit more about what they're talking about, right? So by monocrops, I'm going to assume they're referring to corn, soy, wheat, right? Those are like the top three monocrops that are, largely produced, at least here in the U.S., let alone worldwide, right? Now, the interesting thing is that, well, there's a reason why they probably wouldn't get too specific about naming these particular crops, because the next question is, okay, so these monocrops are so harmful to the soil, right? They degrade the soil. Okay. What are these monocrops used for then? So basically, they would have to get into that. I can understand why they wouldn't want to get into that, because if you are an advocate for animal agriculture, you wouldn't want to get into that because it cuts against your argument. As it stands right now, 40%, if I remember correctly, 40% of all corn is fed to livestock in animal agriculture. 36% is used as biofuel. When it comes to soybeans, 90% of soy, at least domestically here in the States, is fed to livestock in animal agriculture. And then finally, wheat, roughly 20% of wheat is fed to livestock in animal agriculture, right? And so what is it like when it comes to like wheat? I believe it's somewhere, what is it, like 5 times, the livestock eat 5 times the amount that people do as far as wheat is concerned. So when it comes to these grains and monocrops that they were talking about, they're largely consumed by livestock in animal agriculture. So knowing this, it would make sense that, hey, if we stopped feeding livestock and if we stopped expanding animal agriculture, then we wouldn't have to produce as much of these monocrops. And that can be very beneficial to our soil. So since you care about our soil so much, then it would make sense to actually get rid of animal agriculture so that we can stop filling the need to grow all these monocrops, right? So the argument against monocrops really undercuts the narrative that they're painting right now, which is a good reason why they wouldn't want to get into those specifics. Not good. Not a good faith. Not a good faith argument here at all, right? But okay, let's see if they clean it up here and they continue. Let's see.
Tunnel vision on that, carbon tunnel vision. And that really started around about 2018, 19, I think, when we started to talk about net zero. And so we seem to be obsessed by that, and we're forgetting about this other huge catastrophe which is going on in the world, which is soil degradation and desertification, which is something that Alan Savory does talk about. Is that's when all your soil just simply becomes like dust and you have nothing growing there and it blows away and then you can't absorb water, and that's why you have floods, and the whole thing again is a vicious cycle. So if we can reverse that desertification, we can do a whole lot for the planet. We can start to absorb more of that carbon. So we sort of solve two problems in one, as it were.
You know what absorbs the carbon? Plants. You know what absorbs the carbon? Trees. That's what absorbs the carbon. So if we're going to talk about soil degradation, right, if this is the thing she wants to talk about is soil degradation, well, we have to talk about things like deforestation. Okay? Now, I can understand why she wouldn't want to talk about deforestation, because a large driver of deforestation is animal agriculture, right? So when you're knocking down whole rainforests in order to have land, flat, clear land for livestock, well, yeah, you're going to significantly contribute to the increase in carbon emissions and a decrease of that absorption and conversion of those carbon elements, because you knock down the forests that were used in order to maintain that carbon balance. And then, of course, the trees, they have roots. They have a whole network of roots that really hold the soil together. And there's this revolving ecosystem where the trees feed the soil and the animals that live in those ecosystems. And then the soil feeds back into those trees, and it's a cycle, right? So the trees feed the soil, and the soil feeds the trees, and it goes back and forth. And in that wheel of back and forth energy, that also sustains all of the life forms that exist within inside those ecosystems. Of course, until you bulldoze the whole thing and burn it down in order to make space for animal agriculture. Right? So if she's a real champion for to prevent soil degradation and to improve climate emissions, which she doesn't think that climate emissions is a big deal, which, okay. So if you don't want to believe in that, that's fine, but then I don't know why you wouldn't. But even if you didn't want to, right? You're just, it's just largely overstated, the emissions, we don't need to focus on that. Well, then let's talk about how we're using the land and the deforestation that is a large contributor to the soil degradation. So I can understand why she wouldn't want to get into the details about that, because again, this is another thing that cuts against her argument. So not only do you have to make all of this space for the livestock, but then you also have to make all this space to grow monocrops to feed the livestock. So again, these are all just arguments in favor of a plant-based diet. But all right, let's continue.
And I would just love to see more focus on that and see more people putting their money behind that.
Now, one of the things on Alan Savory's talk called How to Fight Desertification and Reverse Climate Change is that the TED organization has since marked it as controversial because what he said was that he was able to use livestock, move them around these places that were showing terrible desertification. And because now there's this ideological capture against ruminant animals, they've marked that as political when really it should be.
Is this the official fact checkers? Is this the official statement you're getting?
Yes, if you look on Ted's website under his talk, they've said, well, this is controversial now. It wasn't 10 years ago. And it's a really moving piece about a man who had made really heartbreaking decisions about killing off elephants and things like that. So
he made really heartbreaking decisions about killing off elephants. You could just not kill off elephants. You could just not do that. You can also just not knock over forests in order to make room for animal agriculture. But so apparently, this man says, and I don't know if I'm interpreting this correctly, it's a bit of an odd thing here, but there's a guy where he had to kill off a bunch of elephants and he felt really bad about it. And then he led animals around. I guess he led a bunch of cows around, and they revitalized the soil on, leading them around. I don't know what it's like. Cows just walk through a desert area, and they have they have a magical property that causes foliage to regrow. I don't know what the claim is here. And of course that would be controversial because it sounds a bit ridiculous. Like, oh, he just led animals around and it revitalized the earth. It's magic. All right. Well, apparently the elephants don't do that. But the cows that you make money off of for animal agriculture, they do that. Which, oddly enough, I mean, to make this argument and then have a grievance with ideological capture is a bit odd to me. It doesn't seem to me that those ideas are very compatible, but magical cows that take the place of trees, apparently. All right, well, I can see why that would be controversial. Now, of course, are they going to get into the details of why Ted marked that as being controversial? Was it that there was a lack of evidence for the claims or what? They're not going to get into that. And the story was honestly a little too ridiculous for me to look into it because I'm like, well, rather than lead around animals to revitalize the soil, how about, you plant trees and, regenerate forests and have vertical agriculture and that kind of thing. That seems to me would make a lot more sense. But if you're really obsessed with drinking from and eating from and butchering cows, then I guess, you are ideologically captured to be able to do so. But all right, let's continue.
It is totally political. You take up Eat Lancet, who is the organization that continues to push plant-based diets and show how they are now a political organization more than anything else. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, they were formed as a political organization, so they weren't entirely interested in human health or in saving the environment purely in the beginning, and so they're an amalgamation of people. 90% of the people on their commission are already vegetarians or vegans, or affiliated with organizations to do with those two diets. So you already have a bias in what they're going to be recommending. They then have a link up with organizations like the UN Food Commission and the WEF, and therefore they form a kind of group of elite organizations who are looking to change the world in the image that they prescribe, that they think is the best. It's a very top-down image. It's a mistaken image, in my view. But because it's all these organizations that have this supposed authority in the world, a lot of people accept them and say, well, they must be correct.
All right, so the Lancet, it's just political, and we don't like politics. What's interesting is this conversation is being had on a political podcast. It's kind of odd to be against politics while you run a political podcast. It seems a bit odd, but okay. So there's ideological capture. They're pushing this eat Lancet diet apparently, and apparently that's a plant-based diet according to them, which it's not. But we'll get into that. Okay. Okay. So basically, it's these oligarchs, from the World Economic Forum and the UN and and whatnot, and I guess they're a spooky group of folks who want to remake the world in their image and get us to eat more fruits and vegetables and to stop eating meat. Right? He says these vegans and vegetarians. All right. Well, let's see if there's some real concrete numbers and data, some substance. Give me some substance here, right? We got the agenda about the spooky wealthy people and the global cabal where they want to get us to eat more fruits and vegetables. But all right, let's keep going.
And what people don't realize is that the science underlying their recommendations is not always correct. And so the Eat Lancet diet, for instance, has been shown to be nutritionally deficient. It just does not have enough. And they themselves have admitted, as I said in the book, and you probably remember this, they admitted that it wasn't suitable for babies or toddlers or teenagers or young adults or pregnant women or frail people, sick people. So you're thinking, well, who is this for, this diet?
That's interesting. Yeah, who is it for? Are you gonna tell us? Who did they say it was suitable for? Are you gonna tell us? So you're gonna tell us who they say it's not suitable for, but you're not gonna tell us who they say it's suitable for. So so you mean to tell me that they went through the trouble of producing this diet, and it's not a good diet for all these different groups of people, right, that you went through the trouble of naming, but they went through all the work of putting this together for all these groups that it's not suitable for, but they never said what groups of people it is for? On its face, if I didn't know anything about Eat Lancet or whatever the case is, right, that wouldn't make sense to me on its face. Because why would they go through the trouble of putting together this particular diet and they themselves say, hey, it's not good or it's not suitable for all of these groups of people, but they never tell you who it is suitable for? That's a bit odd to me. This seems like a bit of a lie by omission, which so far in this video, we got a lot of lying by omission going on here. So this isn't exactly a good faith effort at having an honest conversation. So far on this podcast, right? I don't like to jump the gun and call people liars, but let's be honest about what it is. There's a lot of lying by omission going on. There's a lot of omission in general going on here, right? A lot of things we're not being told. But okay, let's continue here. Let's see if she has anything else of substance, right? Because it's deficient and it's inadequate and all of this type of stuff. All right, well, let's talk about what the deficiencies are.
Who can it possibly be adequate for? It's quite a big list of people who are excluded. It was also shown by a number of analysts to be unaffordable by most of the world. So we do need to think about diets in the context of the different climates in different countries, the different cultures, the different economic circumstances.
Okay, so now what I would be really interested to see, because she's got a critique for this Eat Lancet thing, right? She's got a real critique for that. And it's deficient and it's not for all these groups. So she's telling you everything that's wrong with it, but she's not going to tell you what it is. That's that omission thing I was talking about. Eat Lancet. There are these spooky UNWEF people who just want to get you to stop eating meat, and they produce this diet where it's inadequate, it's not for all these groups of people, nobody knows who it's for, and it's unaffordable by like the majority of the world. Okay. What is it? What is it and who is it for and why did they create it? None of those details are given. That's a bit odd to me. That doesn't pass the sniff test. Now, the interesting thing is this Eat Lancet diet, guess what? It's a flexitarian diet. It's not a vegan diet. It's 20% meat and 14% fish. So we get a combination of 34% animal products. It's not a vegan diet. So it's got a variety of different types of meat, and it even has fish in it, but it's so inadequate. Okay, what specifically makes it inadequate? And if it's unaffordable, what are the specific foods in this diet that make it unaffordable? Does she say? Let's find out.
And if a diet, there simply is no one prescriptive diet that will fit the whole world. So the very idea on which these organizations are based, to me, seems problematic. The idea that you can centrally dictate and determine what is best for every single person on the planet.
Now, this
Okay. Now, does the diet, is it like a diet plan for the whole world, regardless of region? Doesn't seem like they would do that because certain foods grow in certain regions of the world. So obviously, depending on what region you're in, you would have to eat the foods that grow in that region of the world. That makes sense. So it doesn't seem to me like they came up with a diet plan, but the thing is that in what she just said, there's no specifics or no details on what Eat Lancet actually is or what the diet structure is. How much of it is fruit? How much of it is vegetables? How much of it is whole grains? How much of it is meat? How much of it is dairy, if any? Doesn't say. How much of it is legumes? Doesn't say. How many calories a day? How many meals a day? Doesn't say. So there's no details given. This is the running theme. She's real light on details. She's very light on specifics here. Very vague, right? There's a lot of innuendo, a lot of implication, but there's nothing concrete. There's no substance to the claims. Bit odd, right? A lot of omission going on here, right? Now, if we're making a critique of the plant-based con, why would you bring up a diet that's not even plant-based? I mean, it's an omnivorous diet that she's critiquing, right? So yeah, I mean, if you have this critique for the diet, give us more of a general overview of what this diet actually entails. Let's get some substance here. So there was no delivery on the substance whatsoever, as far as the whole Eat Lancet thing, which I'm kind of like, well, why even bring it up if you're going to be this vague about it? Seems a bit odd. It's almost like, well, we want to spin a narrative, but if we give more details, it's going to undermine the narrative I'm trying to spin. So let me deliberately be vague so I don't get tripped up and undercut my own narrative that I'm trying to spin here. Right? Because you know what? It's in your best interest to be vague when the details are very inconvenient for the message you're trying to get across. Right? So this is a media literacy thing to really take note of here. All right, but let's keep going.
This was interesting to me, thinking about who is in power promoting what diet, was the history of the food pyramid in the United States and how it goes back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And the woman who had a vision about this had her book prescribed by one of the Kellogg family.
Yeah.
And that leads us to where we are today. I found that really fascinating. Can you give us a little synopsis of it? And then again, I'm going to ask my readers to read it for themselves.
Okay, interesting. So now we're moving on to Seventh-day Adventist Church and the food pyramid in Kellogg. That's interesting because the food pyramid is not vegan either. The food pyramid is not plant-based either. So I guess we're just moving off of, we haven't even talked so far about the plant-based diet. We haven't talked about land usage. We haven't talked about the effects that animal agriculture is. Well, I shouldn't say they have. I did. They haven't, right? I had to fill in the gaps of all the things that they didn't bring up in this conversation so far, which for me is a lot of work. There's a lot of things I've had to add to what they're not telling you. Okay, so we're going to get into the Seventh-day Adventist Church and in the food pyramid, which, I mean, I don't really know anyone who does eat according to the food pyramid. And that's not reflected in our media and our commercials or anything like that either, right? And it doesn't show up in our statistical data either because, our food system here in a country like the US is largely driven by animal agriculture, which she is a big foot soldier for, right? So it's a bit odd to me, right? We're talking about the food pyramid, so we're not even going to talk about the details of Eat Lancet. We're not going to talk about water usage. We're not going to well, they aren't going to talk about these things. So we're moving on to the food pyramid and Kellogg and religion and Seventh Day Adventists. Okay, let's talk about that.
Sure. So the woman you're talking about is Ellen G. White, who was the founder of the Seventh Day Adventist Church back in 1863, who allegedly had a vision from God about a number of things, but one of those things was the way people were supposed to eat to be pure. And that was a vegetarian diet. And so henceforth, her writing was based on that principle. And her protege, John Harvey Kellogg, was typing out her documents and helping her distribute her pamphlets, and he absorbed that kind of message. He then went on to found Kellogg's, the great cereal company, to provide food that was not meat, something that would give people their nutrition, he thought, without being sinful, because he thought that meat caused all kinds of sins. And then it didn't stop there because John Harvey Kellogg founded, he sort of coached and brought on board a number of nutritionists, including one very, very influential dietitian called Lena Cooper, who founded the Dietetic School of America, who wrote the textbook that was used by all these dietitians, and who then started to infiltrate her ideas, her books, her proteges infiltrated the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Commission. And so you see that religious influence carrying all the way through to something that we now see in modern day America.
They infiltrated. It's an interesting choice of words. It was an infiltration. Okay. I like that. That's slick. let's continue. Like some type of military operation. They infiltrated. All right.
Around the world is this dietary advice. And there are many people who sit on that guidelines commission today who are also Seventh-day Adventists, also vegetarians, and who share those beliefs which have some origin in religion, not in health and science.
Recently, the American government released a preliminary study saying that processed foods is actually not a contributor to obesity.
I saw that.
And I thought that was hilarious. But again, I go back to your research showing just how much corporate influence there is.
Now, what's interesting too, so that was, to my understanding, an op-ed by the Daily Mail. Now, the Daily Mail is not known for being a credible source of information. So, for example, I believe recently I saw from the Daily Mail, they had an article about how plant-based meat substitutes actually increase your risk of heart disease or increase your mortality. Right? So basically, it causes a declination in health outcomes. And they put like Beyond Burgers or Impossible Burgers, one of those, on the front of the thumbnail to lead the reader to believe that it was these mock meats, right? These processed mock meats that were producing these negative outcomes on human health. Now, the study that they were basing this opinion piece on used a very minuscule amount. I believe it was like less than 1% of the total caloric intake was actually from mock meats. Okay, so they included all types of things, soft drinks, cakes, cookies, etc., and lumped in the mock meats with it. So it was actually a thing about all ultra processed foods in general, whether plant-based or otherwise, right? So, but what they wanted to do is paint a picture of like processed vegan foods versus meat eating, which is not really a fair comparison at all. And it wasn't a study about specifically Impossible or Beyond meats compared to actual, meat from an animal and what their effects are on human health. That's actually not what the study was. So a bit of a misrepresentation there. So Daily Mail is not really known for being a very credible source of information. But okay, so she flashed a headline there saying that, oh, the government says that processed foods don't actually contribute to obesity and things like that. Okay. Was that all they said? And what was the reason why they said it? Let's see if they get into the details of that.
In government dietary recommendations. So I throw that out with the trash now. So who do we trust?
That's the right thing to do.
Well, this is good. Who do we trust? That's a good question. You don't trust the government. You don't trust private interests, seemingly. We don't trust these spooky oligarchs, the WEF or the World Health Organization or the UN. We don't trust any of them. So who do we trust? Very good question. If all the numbers that you've seen they don't satisfy your particular leanings, or you don't find these numbers or data sets to be durable, well, then which ones do you find to be durable? Who do you trust? Let's see how she answers that.
Definitely the right thing to do.
It feels like the right thing to do. And I will say, it's not just about my own health. I have 2 adolescents who are in the throes of their growth phases and their stages of puberty. And I am supremely interested in optimizing that for them. And I don't want any politics in the growth of their bodies. So who would you trust?
You don't want any politics in the growth of their body. You don't want politics in the growth of their body. That's interesting because we know that everything is political, right? Your air, your water, your food system, your trade relations, your marriage laws, housing, everything is political. So to say that you don't want which is weird because she runs a political podcast. So a person who runs a political podcast seems to have this big adverse reaction to politics. It's a bit odd. Now I can understand if she said, I don't want a particular type of politics being in the diet. Okay, but she says any politics. Okay, what about your own politics? All right, but setting that aside, maybe I'm being too petty, right? So I'll back off of that. So let's see how she answers this question. Who do you trust?
Then, if not our own governments.
Oh, yeah, that is such a good question. And I get asked that all the time. And I'm quite often stumped because who to trust is a very big question. I think you trust yourself.
She's stumped. She doesn't know who to trust. Trust yourself. Don't trust the ones running the studies. This whole global scientific community where they commit their whole entire lives and their whole academic and educational career towards producing these studies, right? They dedicate their whole lives in the pursuit of this scientific research, right? To produce durable, actionable information. We can just dismiss all of them and instead just trust yourself. Don't trust data or anything like that. Just trust yourself, whatever that means. Okay, I don't know how credible of an answer that is, but okay.
First of all, so take responsibility for your own health and for really finding out not only what's best for you, but the truth behind some of these studies. So I'm afraid if somebody really wants to be informed, they have to go and look at the study that's being quoted, look at who funded it, decide what influence that might have, look at the...
I agree with that, actually. I do agree.
Conclusions and look at some of the data to see if it matches. And if it...
Look at some of the data to see what matches. What data? Because there's no data that you trust. So what data do you compare it to? All right.
Doesn't, or if you don't have time to do that, by the way, there are other people that do it for you. So there's a woman who does this every Monday. Her name's Zoe Harkham, Dr. Zoe Harkham. She is a godsend because she takes every one of these studies, or most of the important ones, and she dissects them for us and really does a full, thorough analysis. And what you begin to realize on reading her documentation and her website, which is the best £50 you'll ever spend for a year, by the way, if you want to be really educated, is you realize that 99% of these studies are trash.
Interesting. So 99% of all the studies, these studies, she doesn't, again, that vagueness, she's not going to tell you what studies she's referring to. And she's not telling you what the flaws are in the studies. She's not giving any examples. She's not naming any studies. She's just saying these studies, the studies. But there's this one woman that I guess that she found on the internet that if you pay her 50 pounds, she's going to tell you what the studies mean and if they're credible. So don't trust yourself. Trust this woman that you found on the internet, who she's going to tell you what her interpretation of the studies is, and you should just believe that. And according to her, she's going to tell you what the studies mean, and then she's going to say, in these studies that I'm telling you what they mean, all of these studies are garbage and you should just dismiss all of them. 99% of them. 99%. Wow. Okay. So, wow. So what is the 1% that are credible? I would love to know what an example of that 1% of the studies actually are. Name a study. Name at least one. Let's see if she does that.
Yeah.
Absolute trash. So then, where do you go for health information? You look for what I call mechanisms. So try and understand not this high-level epidemiology, which is...
Epidemiology. No, we don't need epidemiology. We just need mechanisms. Okay. Which mechanisms? Which mechanisms? Which mechanisms are you referring to? Let's see if she gives us an example of the mechanisms that she's referring to.
So misleading. But go to the people who write about what the body needs and what foods that comes in. And, you know, for instance, there's a fantastic psychiatrist called Dr. Georgia Ede. I mentioned her in the book, and she's got a new book out. She writes about all the things that brains need, healthy brains. Where do you find those? You find them in certain foods, and here's the clue: it's not plant foods.
There's nothing in plant foods that are needed for brain health. There's no benefits to your brain health found in plants. That's a very strong statement. Wow. Okay. So plants, even though you have plants that are loaded with vitamin C, B vitamins, magnesium, fiber that serves as a prebiotic to feed your probiotic gut bacteria that then release postbiotics like B12, folate, vitamin K2, etc. No. No difference. And we know because of the mechanisms, right? Not any of the mechanisms I just described. So I'd really like to know what mechanism she's talking about. So for example, most dietary magnesium comes from plants. What effect does magnesium have on the human brain? Magnesium actually helps to reverse anxiety and depression and improve sleep quality, right? Magnesium is needed for the synthesis of serotonin. Serotonin is then converted in the brain into melatonin, which allows you to fall into deep sleep to get good quality sleep. And that in turn helps to improve your brain function and maintain a healthy brain. You referring to those mechanisms? But according to this Georgia Ede person, that's not found in plants. Magnesium, we don't need magnesium. There's no benefit to plant foods containing that magnesium. What about thymine? What about niacin, pyridoxine, pantothenic acid that is found in foods like watermelon, cantaloupe, bananas, etc.? None of these things are beneficial for human health. What about the vitamin C and the copper and things like grapes and kiwis that improve iron absorption to help reverse dietary anemia? What about that? That doesn't improve your brain health either. That doesn't improve hemoglobin, right? That protein found in red blood cells that allows for oxygen uptake and delivery to your brain. Not that. What about the tryptophan found in cashews and bananas? You know, that tryptophan that is used in order to synthesize serotonin for that, serotonin, the happy hormone, the hormone that allows you to feel happiness and peace in your mind, right? That combat things like anxiety and depression and improve dopamine sensitivity. That no benefit there. What about the omega-3 essential fatty acids that's found in things like hemp seeds, chia seeds, flax seeds, leafy green vegetables, blueberries, avocado? You know those essential fatty acids that are used in order to maintain adequate brain function? You don't find that in plants either. So all of these things, all of these vitamins and minerals and amino acids that I just described, those mechanisms, apparently that's not found in plants. It's news to me. See, it's not that hard to go into the details like I just did. But you have to know the details, or at least be willing to be honest about what those details are. Again, that omission, that vagueness, it serves a purpose when you're trying to spin a particular narrative. So let's continue.
Right.
And she describes the actual medical pathways, the biological pathways from point A to point B in terms of brain health and how these foods contribute.
You mean like I just did? Okay.
To me, that's what you can trust. You can trust something like that, which is giving you the biology, not the epidemiology. So basically, that would be a guide. Throw all the epidemiology in the trash.
Oh, all that inconvenient epidemiological data. Let's throw it all in the trash because it's very inconvenient. It only makes my job of spinning this narrative harder. So do me a favor, make my job easier by throwing out all the epidemiological data. All of it, just all of it, because that's how inconvenient epidemiology as a whole is. Statistical data, inconvenient. All right. I mean, that is quite an admission. That is quite an admission. Very bold.
And also, you take bit by bit a lot of these components of plant-based diets, for instance, plant-based milks or seed oils or other types of fillers that the human body just doesn't like. And so for me, I sort of take that.
Seed oils that the human body just doesn't like, such as... Are we talking about black seed oil? Which is one of the most antioxidant rich seed oils that you can possibly consume, where there's all kinds of scientific data that shows that black seed oil improves blood pressure, cholesterol, it's anti-cancer, loaded with all types of antioxidants that suppress autoimmune disease. Right? You mean like that black seed oil that is largely medicinal? What about castor oil? You mean that? That is also similarly beneficial to human health, in particular your skin quality, hair, skin, nails, all that kind of stuff. Fights eczema, etc. You mean like that seed oil? What kind of seed oils are we talking about? Are we talking about rapeseed? Are we talking about, because they mentioned seed flour. You mean sunflower seed oil? What kind of seed oils are we referring to here? Hemp seed oil? I don't know. She doesn't say. All right, let's continue.
As a guideline. And then I will say, I am a fan of those people who do Instagrams or YouTube videos around the grocery store and say, this, it's got this, and this, it's got this, and that helps. But those are by no means any kind of official organization. It just helps me navigate the processed food grocery market.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if they're official because they're pointing to something you can actually see. It's true what they're saying. They hold up a package. There'll be 25 ingredients. There'll be sugar mentioned 10 times sometimes.
Right.
Because
25 ingredients and sugar named 10 times. Is it 10 different forms of sugar? Can you name some of them? Since there's 10 of them, can you name them? Give us some examples.
these manufacturers, as you know, they were alert to the whole excess sugar warning. And so they have sugar in about 10 different forms in each of their products. So people have to learn how to decipher those labels. So I'm with you. I love all these influencers who are doing that. There's one we have here called Eddie Abu, who is just taking the world by storm. He speaks a young language, and he's really reaching people. I find that incredibly heartening.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting is Random people on TikTok and Instagram, oh, they're taking the world by storm. They're so intelligent. They've got the right ideas. But the the scientists with all these degrees and PhDs and lifetime of experience of producing studies and observing mechanistic data, taking the theories and putting it into play, constructing studies and all of that type of stuff, running studies from anywhere from 10 to 20 to 40, even 75 years. Just take all of that and throw it in the trash. And let's see what Eddie Abu has to say about Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Okay.
I love him too. Now, I guess I'll ask you this and then I'll let you go. A lot of these diets, a vegan diet or a zone-based diet, or back in the 90s, we had low-cal diets. They sort of have a peak and they ebb and flow. Although the study we just mentioned, the US government did say, well, it really is about calories. And I thought, what? That's 30 years ago. We're not going back to that. Do you think, because you mentioned there are so many what you call late stage vegans who just feel terrible trying to follow these guidelines, do you think that it will follow this popularity bell curve and we will maybe see it fade in popularity, or is there too much institutional capture to let that?
Now that's interesting. These late stage vegans, where they just capitulate to the deficiencies of a vegan diet, which interestingly enough is all of the people with the chronic illnesses are mostly omnivores. They eat meat. So are we going to talk about late stage omnivores, or are we just going to talk about these late stage vegans? That late stage terminology. All the diabetics and the people with the heart disease and the high blood pressure getting the triple bypasses and the cancer and all of that type of stuff. Those are not late stage omnivores. What we really need to focus on are the late stage vegans, apparently. Okay, all right. I'm just saying, y'all, pay attention. Pay attention, because it's gotten worse progressively over time, right? So basically, just pointing out all the omission and the vagueness and whatnot, all the problems that we're having here in this interview. So it's just getting some good old fashioned media literacy going on here.
Happen.
Wow, there is so much institutional capture, and there's so much capture by the zeitgeist, if I can say that.
Yeah.
Well, they're captured by the zeitgeist. Can I go in the stock market and invest in the zeitgeist? What does that mean, the zeitgeist? They're captured by the zeitgeist. So they're not captured by industries. They're not captured by particular corporations, lobbyists. They're captured by the zeitgeist. What does that even mean exactly?
I don't think in the past, all these diets that you mentioned, Zone or Atkins or any of the others, for instance, or Weight Watchers, they would attract a certain population, but they wouldn't get this kind of mainstream coverage and support. And this diet, the vegan diet, is now supported not by what people claim for health benefits, but this whole argument about the environment, the argument about animal welfare. It's like that three-legged stool. It's pretty sturdy, right? You can't really knock it over as easily.
Oh, you can't really. All of this evidence, So, for example, all the PTSD that slaughterhouse workers get, right, and how underpaid they are, and how dangerous their jobs are, right? That strong argument based on human empathy. Because not only is you're butchering massive amounts of animals, but also human beings are also being negatively impacted by it as well. It's breaking their brains in these slaughterhouses, right? Or the environmental, degradation that animal agriculture is having, right? Like, the excess water usage and depletion, the land erosion, the excess land intensive practices from animal agriculture, the deforestation, the forest fires, the depletion of the soil, the waste product production from animal waste that's then running off into other people's water where they no longer have clean drinking water because of toxic runoff from these animal agricultural plants, or the antibiotics that are introduced into these animals generation after generation after generation, where the human gut microbiome is being eroded by all of these chemicals and antibiotics and whatnot found inside the meat, right? Which is reducing the human gut's health, which is resulting in things like B12 deficiencies, which is resulting in things like excess levels of IBS, or leaky gut, gout, these types of things, right? Iron deficiencies, etc., right? Skyrocketing rates of cancer, etc., right? Folate deficiencies, things like this. Not going to talk about that, right? Because that's a real strong argument in the vegan column, right? So and then of course the health data, which is why you should dismiss 99% of all the epidemiology, because just so happens that all of the epidemiology supports a plant-based diet, a whole food plant-based diet, because of all of it's just simply outperforming. Vegan and vegetarian diets are outperforming more omnivorous diets, right? So that's very inconvenient when you have to be a successful foot soldier for the agricultural industry, for the animal agricultural industry. It's very inconvenient, right? So that it's that troublesome three-legged stool.
Is the other diets. So I think it's going to take a while for the heat to die down. But I do think it will die down eventually, because I think people are cottoning on to some of the lies that are being told, and they're cottoning on to the health detriment. Because, people can try any diet they want, and a lot of people will maybe try a vegan diet and they will thrive on that for a certain period of time because they're coming off another terrible diet, the standard American diet, which is pretty awful. But eventually those nutrient deficiencies are going to kick in because they just have to. And there'll be some sort of muscle loss. There'll be a B12 deficiency, which will cause neurological symptoms potentially. There'll be a vitamin A deficiency, etc., because they won't be able to convert the vitamin A. So eventually those things will happen.
It's amazing to me too that she brought up vitamin A, right? So because the thing is that she has no way of actually demonstrating that a plant-based diet would cause a vitamin A deficiency, because she outright rejects epidemiology. So she's making that claim and she has no way of actually supporting that claim because she's against the data. Or B12 deficiency, which is very inconvenient for her, because about 12 to 15% of the population is B12 deficient or insufficient, but only 1 to 4% of the population identify as vegan. So if just simply just not eating meat is the reason why that's driving you into B12 deficiency, well then why is it that most people who are B12 deficient or insufficient are omnivores? They eat meat, they're not vegan. So of course you would have to dismiss the epidemiology because these numbers are very inconvenient. Right? So we're not going, you can't convert to vitamin A. Convert what to vitamin A? You talking about that beta carotene? Are you talking about that? Right? So there's no way that she can actually demonstrate the legitimacy of any of the claims that she's making here. So if you want to convince me of how harmful this plant-based diet is, well, where's the receipts to actually demonstrate that? She doesn't have it because she rejects all of the scientific data that we currently have on this issue. Now, in terms of B12 deficiency, we could talk about B12 deficiency in relation to your gut health, what I mentioned a little bit earlier. Because B12 is a postbiotic. It is created by your gut bacteria or freshwater bacteria. Right? So, if you have a food system that is eroding your gut bacteria or your gut microbiome, and in order to rebuild your gut microbiome, you need those plant-based foods, like plant-based fermented foods, whether it be coconut yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, pickles, kombucha, things like that, with those probiotics, and then having things like Jerusalem artichoke, having things like papaya, mango, pineapple, a variety of different leafy greens, herbs, and things for prebiotics that feed those probiotics. But she can't really get into those things because that stuff's very inconvenient, because it's not like a meat-based diet is known for its benefits on the gut microbiome. You don't really have that data. You don't even have the mechanisms to even demonstrate that meat is beneficial to your gut microbiome. But there is data to demonstrate the opposite. That's inconvenient as well. So we can't talk about that. So it's just we're just going to cherry pick B12 and vitamin A deficiency, but have absolutely no supporting evidence to verify those claims. All right, let's finish up here.
And so I think that the vegan diet will have a limited number of proponents naturally set because of that natural limitation in the nutrients. And I do hope that, combined with people being more aware of some of the misconceptions around the environment, hopefully that will start to get us talking not about vegan diets or vegetarian diets, but about proper human diets. And this is a phrase which is being used often now: proper human diet.
Now, how do you determine what a proper human diet is? What data are you using to come to that conclusion? Being that you dismiss epidemiology as a whole, it'd be a bit difficult for you to make your case, wouldn't it? This is the reason why you can't just say, I reject 99% of the data, because, you know, I'm working backwards from my conclusion, engaging aggressively in motivated reasoning. It's not a strong argument. We need some receipts if we're gonna, you know, talk about what is an appropriate human diet. Is double bacon cheeseburgers appropriate? Is that an appropriate human diet? You know, double bacon cheeseburger, but remove the bun. Is that appropriate? Let's stop talking about diet types and just talk about what's appropriate. Okay, well, tell us what's appropriate. She hasn't really done that yet, or provided the data to actually demonstrate that. Right, so we're light on substance here once again. But let's continue.
A diet that we were meant to eat, that has everything that we need in it.
Oh, I like that. I hadn't heard this before. Okay, I'm going to be on the lookout for this new phrase, and I will use it myself. I just ask because, you know, you see in restaurants what's popular and what's not. This weekend I was in England, and I ordered a whole milk latte, and they gave me an oat milk latte, I guess because of my accent.
Right.
And I saw the sticker on the top, and I said, oh no, I'm not drinking this. And I brought it back, and she said, we don't have whole milk. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
You don't have it? She was only skinny, whatever. And I said, okay, I'm hoping that this becomes popular now, that, you know, let's switch away from this towards this.
Yeah,
So-
but
Because it is appropriate to get your milk as an adult from a pregnant animal of a different species. Apparently that's appropriate, because unlike every other animal on the planet, we default to suckling from other animals that are not in our species. Right? Oats. That's weird. I'd rather suck on the nipples of a cow instead, because that's appropriate. It's a bit odd to me. I don't know. When I hear this stuff, I mean, I'm like, dude, there has to be a significant lapse in self-awareness to go from, we need to just eat a more species-appropriate diet, to, oats. I need to drink the breast milk of a different species, because that's an appropriate human diet. All right.
I think it's great if people keep going in and asking for the things that are okay, and don't apologize. Don't apologize for your whole milk, or your butter, or whatever else, you know. And actually, I don't like being a pain at restaurants, but I think I will in future be asking restaurateurs, do you cook this in seed oil or olive oil or butter? Because if it's in seed oil, I don't want it.
Yeah.
And that might be a good way to register with them that that's not such a healthy option.
Now, what's interesting is none of them explain why the seed oils are an actual problem. They never explain why. Oh, it's just seed oils. It's no good. We need butter because it comes from an animal. We need to find a pregnant mother cow, a pregnant heifer, as we say. And then what we need to do is we need to take her milk from her and keep her baby away from that milk. And then we can make butter and cheese, and then we can have milk for our latte. Because, lattes are species appropriate. Butter from a different species is species appropriate for us. It's human. It's appropriate for human. It's appropriate. Now, being an adult and drinking the breast milk of another human being, that's inappropriate. That's not species appropriate, apparently. No. If you get milk, you can't get it from inside your species. You have to get it from a different animal entirely. Because you want to be appropriate. All right. Well, anyways, so basically they keep talking about seed oils. The problem with seed oil, basically either poly or monounsaturated oils, is because they hold up less as far as molecular structure when it comes to applying thermogenic energy to them. So when you heat up these oils, right, whether it be olive oil, canola oil, grapeseed oil, right, things like this, when you cook them under high temperatures and you cook them past their smoke point, they become oxidized and they break down on a molecular level and they become rancid or they become toxic, right? And so the human body, one of the primary objectives of the human body is to excrete or remove things that are oxidized, right? So what you don't want to do is you don't want to oxidize something and then put it in your body because your body is trying to get rid of things that are oxidized, right? So you're working against one of your body's primary functions when you consume that oxidized oil. That's the problem. So when we talk about how toxic and how harmful fried foods are, well, fried foods are problematic because a fried food is fried in oil. It doesn't matter if it's fried in butter or whatever. If it's fried, it's toxic. It's a carcinogen. It actively feeds cancer, right? Raise your blood pressure, raise your LDL cholesterol, triglycerides, etc., right? So we all know fried foods are bad, but that's why the fried foods are bad. It's because of what you're frying it in, or just the concept of frying in general. Frying something is oxidizing it and then putting it inside your body, right? So I personally don't recommend that people consume much seed oils and definitely don't cook with it. If you want to use a little bit of it to make as a base for a particular salad dressing or a sauce or something like that, that's fine. As long as you're not applying, high amounts of thermogenic energy to it, heat energy to it. Right, so that's the reason there. So this is me once again where I have to fill in the details that they're not telling you.
There you go. Okay. Well, I'm in it with you. We're looking to promote proper human diets. Thank you again for your book. Thank you for your time and coming on Redacted. I want to again let people know that they can pick up the book. It's called The Great Plant-Based Con, and
all right. So we can wrap it up there. But there's a deeper issue here. Because you have to think, why is it that you have these people where they feel the need to go from podcast to podcast? Like they have this media ecosystem with the same people advocating on behalf of animal agriculture, and they leap from podcast to podcast to podcast. And they're all vague. They all reject epidemiology. They don't really have the data to support the claims that they're making. And they all follow the same playbook. It's a bit odd. What's motivating them to do that? Right? Why do they all seemingly advocate for the most destructive behaviors that we can engage in? Right? Why are they doing that? What's motivating that? I mean, even like, oat milk. No. I need the milk of an exploited mother cow. That's what I need. I need the exploitation. I need the violence. I need her to get pregnant, and then I need you to remove her baby from her, and then take the milk from her that she produces, and instead of feeding that milk to her offspring, we ingest it instead. right? And we keep milking her and milking her and milking her and milking her so that we can have whole milk lattes. And then when she runs out of milk, what we do is we get a bull to then impregnate her again, make her have another baby, snatch that baby from her, and then keep milking her again. And we do this to her for her entire adult life until she can't do it anymore. And then when she collapses and no longer is able to do it, well, then we basically chop her body up and eat her body. And then, of course, when she puts out these babies, we kill the babies and eat the babies, right? So we impregnate her, we steal her milk so we can have our oat, so we can have our whole milk lattes, and then we make little double cheeseburgers out of her babies, right? And then, well, we want to put bacon on top of our double bacon cheeseburger. So not only do we need the flesh of the cows, right, the babies and the mothers, but we also need the milk in order to make the cheese slices to put in our double cheeseburger. And then we got to go and we got to kill a cow and we got to slice off layers of its flesh and then fry it in order to make bacon. Right? So what we need to do is we need to cram a whole variety of various forms of violence and exploitation. And we need to consume that violence and exploitation. We need it because it's species appropriate, don't you see? Seems a little pathological to me. Seems a bit obscene. And I mean, largely it's because it is. Right? If you have the oats as an alternative, why do we need to engage in the cruelty and the violence towards other living beings? Why do we need to knock down whole forests? Why do we need to drive all the living beings that exists inside those habitats? Why do we have to destroy their homes and push them out into the streets so they can get hit by cars? And then we can bulldoze whole ecosystems and then just forcibly breed animals, right? And so we can waste a bunch of resources and engage in all those monocrop farming to feed them so that we can keep killing and butchering them. Right? So not only do we have to exploit and brutalize the animals, but we also have to destroy the environment and whole ecosystems in order to make room for it. So we brutalize the planet and the animals that live on it because that's species appropriate. It doesn't seem very species appropriate. It doesn't even seem feasible without, large levels of agriculture and technological advancement. It doesn't seem like a very reasonable way to engage in resource distribution or farming at all. So we got to tell colorful stories about how we had to kill off tons of elephants and then walk cows around the desert so that we can get flourishing habitats again, just for us to knock it down so that we can create more farms, to exploit and abuse and murder more animals. And so while these two ladies are sitting on this podcast talking about, oat milk, oh no, we need our milk to be gotten in a violent way because it's species appropriate. And as that's happening, they're getting an impoverished migrant from south of the border to come to work in our country, right, in a slaughterhouse, being massively underpaid, living paycheck to paycheck, developing PTSD from hearing screaming animals all day, right? As they're butchering and murdering animal after animal after animal with blood splattered all over the floors and the walls and the screaming and the tears of the animals and the horror that you experience from working in a slaughterhouse. But while these ladies are drinking their whole milk lattes, they don't have to develop the PTSD of the workers. So they can be cheerleaders for the industries that produce this level of destruction and violence while they sit cozy and comfy in a studio and a microphone. Talking about how, don't eat plants now because that's not species appropriate. We need something a little bit more destructive, something a bit more violent. We got to destroy our planet. We have to engage with our planet as a malignant virus because it's species appropriate. That's the point. And some of us, We have different, mouthpieces and sock puppets and stooges who go on various media outlets and they cheerlead for different industries. Some do it for animal agriculture in order to manufacture consent for environmental destruction. Others do it in order to cheerlead for, let's say, the military-industrial complex, so that we can fund the bombing of children, right? Tens of thousands of children on the other side of the planet, right? Or manufacture consents for destroying countries like Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Zimbabwe, right? The Congo, Sudan, Ethiopia, Bolivia, Ecuador, Honduras, Cuba. The list goes on and on and on, right? So we have to have this war machine going full steam ahead, destroying country after country after country, right? Theft after theft after theft, stealing the resources of these countries in the same way where dairy advocates want to advocate for stealing from the cows. So it's a collective effort where the goal seemingly is, hey, let's pursue and manufacture consent for the most destructive and violent behaviors we can possibly engage in, whether it's through food, whether it's through war or otherwise, because it's species appropriate. This is cultural pathology. It's not really so much of a plant-based con, but more of a cultural pathology. And I'll conclude with that.